2, 1.
A study undertaken this year shows that the persecution and mass murder of Christians around the world is worse today than at any time in history, and Western governments are failing not only to stop it, but even to acknowledge it. Father George Rutler has just inaugurated the first shrine in the world dedicated to persecuted Christians at his church, which is the same church where I wed sweet little Elisa just a month ago, the Church of St. Michael in Hell's Kitchen. We will discuss the totally silenced Christians' plight. Then the mailbag. I'm Michael Knowles, and this is the Michael Knowles Show. This is going to be a very politically incorrect show. Not politically correct. It is a really strange thing right now. This study, even I didn't realize it, and I've been kind of tuned into these issues of Christian persecution in the Middle East and around the world. It's right now Christians in the world are the most persecuted faith group that there is. You wouldn't know that. If you talk to people in America or in Europe, they always talk about Islamophobia, which Andrew Klavan, I believe, once defined as the irrational fear of having your head cut off. That's not politically correct. But that's all you hear about. You don't hear about the Christians. It's silenced. We're talking about how we need to bring Muslim migrants over. All we have to do is bring the Muslim migrants over. We bring hardly any Christian refugees over. And the Christian refugees are the ones who are being utterly decimated by Muslim militants throughout the Middle East and elsewhere. According to this study by Aid to the Church in Need, they examined Christians in China, Egypt, Eritrea, India, Iran, Iraq, Nigeria, North Korea, Pakistan, Saudi Arabia, Sudan, Syria, and Turkey. Only Saudi Arabia has not gotten significantly worse for Christians over the last few years, and that's only because it can't really get much worse. It's like it's not a thriving metropolis of Christians. The Christians have been almost entirely wiped out of Iraq and Syria. We know, we had Ji Sung Ho on the show, the North Korean defector, just a week or two ago, and he talked about how if you are said to be a Christian in North Korea, you will be executed publicly and on the spot, no questions asked, gun pulled out, shoot you right in the head. This is a weird thing, and especially in the United States and in Europe, I think we have this sense now, especially lefties here, have this sense that, Iraq and Syria, those are for Muslim people. That's not, the Christians aren't supposed to be there. Those aren't for Christian people. But of course, Syria was the home of Christianity for so long. Not all of them, but many of the early popes came out of Syria. Peter is from Bethsaida. Paul had his conversion. He had the scales over his eyes, knocked off his horse on the road to Damascus, or knocked off his as he's going up to Damascus. That's not in Rome. That's not in Tours. That's not in England. That's in Syria. But we have this idea that that's for the Muslims. That's for the Muslim people. All over the Middle East and Africa, there are summary executions of Christians, torture, crucifixion, all of these things. It's not politically correct to say, but that's why we brought on my priest and good friend, Father George Rutler. Father Rutler is, how do you even introduce this guy? A singular figure in my reversion to Christianity. He is the pastor of the Church of St. Michael in New York. He's the author of, I think, 700,000 books at this point. He's a boxer. He's a painter. He's a terrific painter. He plays piano, plays violin. He's just a true Renaissance man. I asked him one time, he was very kind to display my political tome, Reasons to Vote for Democrats, a comprehensive guide, in his rectory in New York. And Father Rutler, I asked him, I said, how do you do all of this? How do you host TV shows and write your columns all the time and write books and do that and that? And he looked at me and he said, don't sleep. It's a fair enough answer. I have to take that advice. He stopped by to talk about the Christian persecution, and as as happens with him, the conversation wandered a bit. Without further ado, here is Father Rutler. Father Rutler, thank you so much for being here.
Delighted to do it.
Father Rutler, the last time I saw you, you were marrying me off.
Right. Well, it was a wonderful day. I really, really enjoyed it. I estimate, roughly, I've had about 800 weddings, and each one is like the first one. There's a lot of work involved in it. People don't realize that, but it's a great joy to me.
It was so lovely, and I was so pleased that you did it and that we did it at the Church of St. Michael. And I know some of the viewers of the show have seen photos that I've been posting of it. And it occurs to me, right before I got married, I'm all nervous, I'm standing in the rectory, I actually saw this shrine, the first shrine in the world dedicated to the persecution of Christians. And it shocks me in two ways. One, that there are so many persecuted Christians, and that nobody's really talking about this. And the other, that it's the first shrine in the world dedicated to them. How did it come about, and why is nobody caring about the persecuted Christians?
Well, first of all, I have a good friend, a priest from England, although he is actually a priest working incarnated, as we say in canon law. That is, he's inscribed in a diocese in Vermont. But he's been on leave now to go and work with the Christian emigres in Iraq. He works out of England, but he's back and forth to Iraq. He's taking some documentary films, which are absolutely stunning. The historic center of Mosul looks like Hiroshima after the bomb, and we don't see much of that. He is raising consciousness. He's organized a group called the Nazarene.org, Nasaroean. And they use the letter N, the Arabic letter, the Noom. It's called Noom in Arabic alphabet, Nazarene, because the Muslim countries will not allow the use of the word Christian, so they call Christians Nazareans. Jesus was from Nazareth. And these little badges are to raise consciousness. It's sort of like, a lot of people in the Second World War deliberately wore yellow stars to show their empathy for the persecuted Jews. And the icon we're talking about was done by an Iraqi from the area of Aradin, which in Arabic means, or Aramaic, they speak Aramaic, which was the language our Lord spoke, means Eden. His house and that property and everything were confiscated by the ISIS. So he had to take his family in exile to Lebanon. And the icon shows the Virgin Mary dressed as an Iraqi bride. The second question is, why has there been such little publicity? Well, first of all, it's politically incorrect because the Western culture on the whole, I think, is very threatened by Islam, doesn't understand Islam. A lot of people of naive left-wing sympathies are replicating the same mistake that was made in the 1930s by a lot of the Western intelligentsia, who thought, well, Hitler's a kind of crackpot, but at least he's anti-Bolshevik, so the enemy of my enemy is my friend. And so they looked the other way towards the Nazi atrocities, Kristallnacht. They thought that would, then that led to the concentration camps. We have to remember that a lot of the Western media, including the New York Times, ignored all the evidence on the concentration camps. There was a very noble Polish Catholic layman, Professor Jan Karski, who eventually went into exile. He documented the concentration camps, what was going on. He came to the West. He went to London. They didn't want to hear about it in Whitehall. He went to Washington. He had an hour with Franklin Roosevelt. Franklin Roosevelt ignored him. Was polite, but didn't want to hear this. He met with Felix Frankfurter, who was the only Jewish member of the Supreme Court, who just was angry. And he walked around the room and said, he couldn't believe it. And later on, he said, I didn't call Karski a liar. I just said that I couldn't believe him. Well, that's what these people are doing. A lot of these people are doing today, because to admit what's going on is to admit that with Islam, we're dealing with something different from what Western bourgeois minds think is religion. We so often hear that these extremists are unrepresentative of the Quran. Well, read the Quran. It's right there. It's not the extremists. It's the more moderate Muslims, God bless them, who want really to integrate into Western society or adopt virtues of Judeo-Christian society. They're the eccentrics. Militant Islam represents the authentic interpretation of the Quran, and that's very politically incorrect to say, but it's a fact. And to acknowledge that what's going on in the Middle East, where you have countries where the Christian populations are evaporating, right in Bethlehem, the population, the Christian population there in the birthplace of Christ, vanishing. People do not want to admit it, and I think just as in the 1930s, you had people, giving the pass to the Nazis because they thought that Hitler and Stalin could fight it out between themselves. Well, they didn't. We had the Ribbentrop Pact, which upset the leftists in the West. So today we have people thinking that, well, the bourgeois, liberal, progressivists who are anti-Judeo-Christian civilization, they wouldn't put it that way, but they are. The way they want to fragment the whole Judeo-Christian moral structure, they'll say, well, all right, Islam, these people are kind of nutty, but they'll bring down Judeo-Christian society. And I said, well, again, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. But as with giving Hitler a pass, you don't understand when you do that what a bacillus you are unleashing on the world.
Of course, that it's interesting that you mention that this long-standing conflict between Islam and the West. Hilaire Belloc, the great Catholic writer, wrote about this in the 1930s. He said, "We're at a lull right now. Things are going all right, but within half a century or so, Islam may start rising up against the West again, and we're going to have to deal with it." And I saw there was a study by Aid to the Church in Need and the McLaughlin and Associates, which showed that among American Catholics, the persecution of Christians in the Middle East and elsewhere ranks the lowest among their list of concerns and global priorities. Ranking higher are poverty, which I believe will always be with us, it's written in a book somewhere, and climate change. Climate change is a greater priority, and I think it speaks to what you're talking about. There has been an ideological displacement or assault on Judeo-Christian morality and Western civilization, and that ideological assault is replacing it. You saw Dianne Feinstein grilling Judge Amy Coney Barrett, and she said, I'm worried because the dogma lives loudly within you. There does seem to be a real battle here. You saw this firsthand. You're in New York City. You've been there. You were an eyewitness to the September 11th terrorist attacks. You were down there at the Trade Center. Has the culture moved in any sort of better direction in the country, or are we just sliding toward further decay?
No, I don't think it has. There's a difference between the theological virtue of hope, which is trusting in God, and the humanistic quality of optimism. Optimism is just wishing things will be well. Hope means knowing things will go well if we trust in God. And a long time, yes. I say to my friends, our culture now is very decadent, but as an historian, I would say we can hopefully say that maybe in 200 or 300 years things will get better. But that's unless you intend to live that long, that's not so much of a consolation. I am part Scottish. I belong to some Scottish societies, and the Scottish tend to be some of them. Generalization, a little dour.
A little surly, yeah.
Yeah, but the difference between a Scottish pessimist and a Scottish optimist is a Scottish pessimist will say, things couldn't be any worse than they are now. And a Scots optimist says, oh, yes, they can. But I think people are like they do, like the ostrich with his head in the sand. They don't want to admit what's going on. Europe is learning. Europe is learning, but the hard way. I think you have some heroic cultures. I think of Poland and Hungary, perhaps Croatia. Some of the those countries that have suffered so vividly all through history, but most dramatically in present time, they know what they are dealing with. Others are comfortable. And, as a matter of fact, the statistics was of all the heads of the EU countries, I think all the heads of the EU countries, at least 6 of them, are childless.
Wow.
So, we have demagogues in our... I loathe it when politicians say, we're doing this for our children. Stop it. That's demagoguery. But in Europe, it's worse because they don't have any children to worry about.
Yeah, we're just doing it for ourselves.
They love a socialist economy because it's fine. They can pass the debt on because they have their own. They don't have children to inherit that debt. The burden's going to be on the body politic. So we can belabor the image of the